Hey free-to-play gang, welcome back after a very long time to yet another tier list. So I know a lot of you guys have asked me for an Abilimon tier list as well and what are my opinions on Abilimons, and I think that's a little bit easier to do than a legendary tier list, which is what we are covering for today. And the reason why I stayed away from it for so long is because I don't really feel like there is a lot of meaning to just keep re-releasing a new tier list, and especially since not much would change over the duration of one patch until 3.1.7, but yet at the same time I didn't want to update a tier list where I have very little knowledge on the new Esper, for example. So this will not come by so frequently, so this will be it for 3.1.8, moving into 3.1.9. And the reason why I want to do it right now is because we now have the current wish pool, which you cannot pull for every single one of the legendary Espers, that's for sure. But there will be a few of those Espers that you can choose from this pool, and I hope that this video would give you an idea of what you should try to aim for based on my opinion and my opinion only. So everything that I will be covering in this video is absolutely based on my opinions. It has nothing to do with the truth at all. It has nothing to do with whatever most people believe in. Because frankly, there were times where I thought of Espers that people really didn't care about. Like for example, Tricky, there was a period of time where no one actually thought that Tricky was good. No one thought that he was useful at all. But I used him since beta period. So I've used him all the way and I've always been putting him in S tier, for example. So I have a lot of unique opinions about different Espers, and it may not always tally with yours, and that's also fine. And if you find that you disagree with anything that I said, feel free to leave it down in the comment section below so that I can understand a little bit more about why you have such an opinion. Where does this come from? Where does this experience come from? And what do I have to learn as well? Because I clearly do not use all the Espers because I do not have any of the legendary Shimmer type Espers. For one. So I can't really say, although I do use them a little bit in the PTR server as well, but not with like endgame relics and all that, right? Not with the endgame experience. So let us start with this video, and how I'm going to do it is we are actually going to talk more about the R2 level of each of these Espers. So I'm not going to go into R4, okay, R4 kind of sucks anyway. I'm not going to go into R6 because that is just very, very far-fetched, and most players are frankly not at a time where we would even consider having an R6 Esper. I have like a couple of R6 Espers, and I do consider myself to be like maybe the top 1% of players who have a lot of resonances. So I think for like most of these videos moving forward, like tier list videos, unless the game is like 5 years old, which hopefully it does reach that period, I will probably just be focusing more on R2. And anyway, enough chit chat. Oh wait, before we begin, I want to thank TT1v9 for creating this tier list template. It's amazing. It looks so freaking clean. I love it so much. I love the fact that everything is like slanted a little bit like the abilities that your Espers have. This looks so clean. Okay, anyway, let's start off with Abigail. So I need to take back a lot of things that I said about Abigail in the past, okay? So this will be the video where I start off by saying that I am sorry that I didn't lie, okay? I had a very bad opinion about Abigail when she first came out. I didn't know what to expect. I saw her as just a buffer, but it turns out that she's a lot more than just a buffer. Now, to my defense, I did say that she's going to be good in PvP, not so much in Point War, which changes a little bit as well, because right now I do feel like she has a little bit more value in Point War. But in terms of PvE content, I said that she was like just a newbie Esper, right? But that's not true at all. So she's in fact really good in PvE right now. So the places where I use her right now is the Dark Starlord. I use her in Chronos. I use her in APEP as well. She has a lot of value. And of course, on top of that, she's one of those key Espers that you definitely need to have in order to excel very well in holo battles and in RTA, warm-up matches. So because of that, right, she already deserves an S tier in my opinion, right? Straight up S tier. But the thing is, we need to talk about her R2 as well, which is, as you can see here, new effect, Rose Blessing, dispels all debuffs from Abigail, which is her third skill, right? It doesn't really carry too much, but then again, it doesn't really take away from the fact that she's just so broken. And her R2 doesn't need to add on to her. She is just so good on her own. Now next up we have Ahmed. So let's take a look at his R2. So essentially what it does is your supporting songs will now grant speed stacks, right? So every single stack gives you 2 speed for a total of 30 speed because he can give 15 stacks to your Espers. But the problem with this is that in PvP, if your Espers start to lose HP and you start to lose out in your healing value, you are actually just going to keep focusing this skill on one Esper and you're not actually going to be able to grant it to several Espers. But this is just something that I wanted to mention, but it doesn't really concern his overall status all that much because PvP is not the be-all and all. But with that said, he's still really good in PvP. He's really good in PvE content as well. He's like very key in a lot of just autoplay content. Like if you want to autoplay Temporal Tower, Ahmed is a really good choice, right? And aside from that, he's excellent in Fafnir. He's like the best healer in Fafnir. He's also pretty decent in Dark Starlord depending on how you're going to use him. But in terms of like Desolate Lands, I don't feel like he has a lot of value in that sense. But that's just strictly my opinion. So because of that, I think I really want to put him in S tier, but I do feel like in terms of like general use, you are not always going to use him in every single content, which is what this tier list is all about. So I'm going to have to put an A tier. He is still great. He's still very, very powerful, very useful. but in my opinion, I don't think he's on the same level as Abigail, for example. Now, next up we have Ashley. So with the changes to Point War and how it works and how it's gonna change again in 3.1.9, the HP bonus, right? That's the one that I'm focusing on. She loses a little bit of value in terms of like Point War speed cleaving, although it is still possible if you have some of the other key as well. Like you have Raven, for example, you have an Unas, for example. She is still going to work pretty decently. But for most players out there, unfortunately, Ashley is not going to be as powerful as she were in the past. She is still incredibly strong, but she's not going to be as strong as she were in the past. In terms of PvE content, yes, I do use her in Temporal Tower for like some speed cleaving action, and I did use her in Dark Starlord, even though I don't really use her in that content anymore, but she's still very viable in that sense. But apart from that, Fafnir, she works, but she's not a necessity, but she does work. But the fact that she doesn't multi-hit is also potentially an issue. So all in all, I do feel like with the changes to PvP, right, just the main thing was the PvP changes. I don't really feel like she deserves the S tier anymore. I feel like she's gonna go down to A tier for the time being until we get to see how 3.1.9 looks like. So I must say that if 3.1.9 proves to be a little bit less taxing on your HP bonus, then I think she actually might go back up to S tier. But for right now, as where she exists in 3.1.8, I just feel like she's in A tier. Now, next up we have Biondina, and she has a very impressive R2, right? So instead of one target, you now have two targets in your passive effect. So you can dispel two separate targets at once. Very nice. I mean, it's not always useful because most of the time you just need to strip off one buff from one enemy and that's about it. But it's still a nice change in my opinion. It reduces the amount of RNG that she has in her kit, which is perfect. So in terms of like holo battles, this skill is going to make her a little bit stronger. It's going to make her less RNG centric, and it's definitely going to make her a little bit more useful as well. So I do feel like in terms of holo battles, she is still good. She's still as good as always. She can one-shot a lot of things as long as the target is of the right element. But in terms of like PvE content, right, if you're just going to talk about pure PvE content, she only does well and she excels very strongly in Sentinel Hunt in the Dark Starlord, but she doesn't do very well in any other content except maybe in Fafnir. But if you're going to be using her in the Fafnir, it's mostly going to be like a newbie team. It's going to be like the easy approach for you to get rid of Fafnir's buffs, for example. So that's where she shines the most in terms of PvE content. So because of how niche she is, she's so niche that I have to put her in C tier. She is still really good, but it's just that her usefulness is very limited in certain areas. Now, next up we have Brewster. So his R2 effect, at the start of combat, you gain 3 reload attack stacks. This is so powerful because what it does is, I mean, I'll just leave this on the screen or you can't even read it anyway. What it does is it assists all of your allies with his normal skill, right? His S1, which lends defense break, which is very good. So whenever you start every single wave, you are almost certainly always going to have defense break because whenever one of your allies attack, he's going to attack with his first skill as well. And that also means that he does not need to be built very speedy. In fact, he can be built very slow because all you need is for your allies to attack on your behalf, and you don't need to take the first turn, just use your third skill just to gain more of these stacks at the start. So his R2 is quite changing for his kit, and I really like it so much. So right now, not only is he really good in APEP, he's also really good in the Dark Starlord, like extremely good in Dark Starlord. And I have seen some teams use him in the Sentinel Hunt for some extra DPS on the boss, just more DPS in general. And he's also very viable in Temporal Tower, especially in Temporal Tower 50, where I use him a lot in that place so that he can reduce the AP of the enemy by 100%. And I've also seen him used quite a little bit in Point War as well, where I feel like he shines a lot in R2 because in most cases, he is going to gain a turn very quickly just because your allies are able to push his AP with his R2 status, right? So he's very viable in many different content right now, and I kind of feel like he deserves a pretty decent rating, and I think I'm just going to chuck him at A tier right now. I don't feel like he is S tier material just yet, but I do feel like he has a lot of potential with the changes in his kit right now due to resonances. Now, next we have Cecilia, and her R2 effect is quite forgettable. We don't really care too much about it. But in terms of the way she is right now, she is only really broken at R6. But before R6, I don't think she is necessarily that insane. She is still quite good because of the changes to her passive. Now it's an active skill with an inbuilt passive effect where if she dies and your skill is not on cooldown, she is going to revive the rest of your allies for free. I mean, not say for free, but your cooldown has to be ready at the time of her death. So she's a little bit more versatile right now, she's a little bit more active in gameplay, which makes her a little bit better, but it's not going to change the fact that at R2, she is still incredibly niche and just very limited in the places where you would use her, except for like, you know, just PvP content, right? And I think in terms of PvP, she truly shines the most in RTA and in Point War. I don't think that Holo Battles is a place where she does very well. I don't think so. But I think her R6 is a little bit better because she becomes more viable in a lot of different content, because as long as she dies, she's going to instantly push your entire team to like 100% AP, you know, as long as you have dead allies, for example. It's going to be very good in many different places, maybe even in the Dark Star Lord as well. So next up we have Clara, and her R2 effect is pretty good, right? So now the immunity that she provides on her third skill is extended from 1 turn to 2 turns, which is a big deal. So the thing is, at R2 she becomes very powerful in a lot of content. In a lot of PvE content where you have the extra stack of immunity, and that's going to carry you very far as well, because after you take a turn, for example in Temporal Tower, right, after taking one whole turn, you still have 1 layer of immunity to protect you, which is very important, especially in the stages that has a lot of controls. So right now she's really good in many different content. She's excellent in APEP. She's also viable in Chronos as well, because her landing misses on Chronos doesn't really matter all that much, but her healing potential is really good, and she carries the AP push as well. And she's really good in Temporal Tower, Infinity Tower, just very safe for all kinds of PvE content. She's very viable in Dark Star Lord. She's also very useful in the Desolate Lands. I think Shadow Gale, she's really good in Shadow Gale, and I think in Shadow Stream, she has certain usefulness because she pushes the AP of your team. So because of that, the sheer versatility and viability of her, she's definitely going to be S tier. So this is what S tier Espers look like, right? Just really good in many different content, and they excel in it as well. Now next up we have Donar, who is now a free Esper. You just need to farm a shit ton in a tournament shop. But here's the thing about Donar. So at R2 he does gain a new turn whenever he gets 5 stacks, which is excellent. So that allows him to gain a new turn, drop his nuke much sooner, so that you don't really need to focus too much on speed. He just needs to get his Thunder Blessing out at the start, or you know, he just needs to take a turn somehow, get his passive ready, and he's able to cycle his skills a little bit better as well. So that's really nice on his kit. But in terms of viability, he's definitely not good in PvE content. I have not seen him useful anywhere. Some people have been saying that he's decent or good in Chronos. I can't figure out how that is true. If you know why he's good in Chronos, do let me know. But in terms of PvP, he kind of lacks a lot because he sucks against Hyde, and Hyde is one of the most meta Espers, and you see Hyde used everywhere right now, right? And there are a lot of controlling Espers on other teams as well, like Tricky, Lucas, a lot of those stuff that kind of sucks a lot for Donar. So because of that, he's in a very bad spot right now, so I don't feel like he has a lot of use, so I'm going to put him at C tier right now. So Elliot at R2 is a little bit interesting because right now his second skill has the ability to increase the cooldown of the target as well. So upon successfully inflicting a taunt, all ability cooldowns of the target will be increased by 1 turn. So not bad. He's actually very much a cooldown increaser. He's a pretty decent controller in my opinion. And obviously he becomes incredibly broken at R6, which is something that I'll cover in a very near future video. Now the main places where you would use Elliot is definitely in content that you can manipulate the enemy's cooldown, which is like Temporal Tower bosses, Infinity Tower bosses, PvP as well, very heavy in Holo Battle, especially against Jiang, for example, right? You just reset the Jiang, kill him, done, that's it. So he's more limited to places like these, right? Endgame PvP, endgame PvE. So from what he's limited to, I do feel like he is not as limited as the niche Espers. He is going to be in the B tier for me, but it's still a pretty good spot for him because he is viable in quite a few places right now. Now Everett, I want to say that he's a beginner friendly Esper, but the truth is he's not, because you do need to have K14 done, you do need to have Fafnir 14, you do need to have APEP 14 as well. So he's definitely not an early game Esper. He is at best a mid or end game Esper. And the reason why I say that he's a pretty decent early game Esper is because not only is he very tanky, right? He's built with a lot of HP, he also reduces the damage that your allies take, and at the same time he heals your allies as well. But obviously the healing only comes from his R6, not R2. But the thing is, for Espers like Everett, it's extremely easy to get R6. As long as you can get 1 copy of him, and R6 is no problem whatsoever. But right now he's really good mostly in PvP content. In terms of PvE, I have not found any true use for him, and that's because like if you're talking about Ritual Miracles, he is a Shima type DPS Esper. So for DPS Espers, you kind of really need to be either Flow, Wind, or Inferno. If not, you're going to receive more damage from the bosses, or you're going to like land misses, for example. So in terms of his typing and his usefulness, or rather his use, I don't think that he's going to be that good in most of the PvE content, except maybe the Temporal Tower, but honestly there are better options apart from him. Like for example, you can use Sally, because Sally right now is the free Special Tower 100 clear, and she does provide good healing, she does provide damage mitigation as well. So in terms of that, I'm going to put him at C tier, which is going to be niche. He's still useful in PvP, but that's about it. Actually, you know what? I might push him at B tier because he is not as niche as Cecilia, for example. He's definitely more viable in several different PvP content. In RTA, in Point War, and in Holo Battle as well. He's good in all three, so I think B tier is probably where he's at. Now, the Fatum sisters, I named her correctly the first time around this time. So in terms of her kit, she lacks a lot, even though she seems to be carrying a lot of stuff. And the reason for that is because of her long ass cooldowns. So the reason why you might not be so interested in using her is because even though she has the speed buff, there are Espers with speed buffs as well with much shorter cooldowns of like 3 turns. So for example, there's Meredith with the speed up buff, and at the same time she also has the speed lead, but yeah, I know the Fatum sisters also have the speed lead, but in terms of just the ability to cycle your speed buff, she is one of the poorest speed buffers in this game right now. And in terms of AP control, she's kinda on a similar level as Tia, but the thing is Tia is a little bit better because she is more geared towards like PvP content, and Tia is also a universal speed lead, which makes her useful in many different contents regardless. But Fatum Sisters, she does not have a PvP speed lead, which means you're not going to be using her as a leader, which means you're probably not even going to be using her in PvP at all. Just use a Tia instead, right? And I mean, you don't really have the choice, but just by going by her role itself, I feel like if you want to have an AP controller, there are better espers out there. So because of that, I'm going to put her at C tier. I don't feel like she has a tremendous amount of use that cannot be replaced by any other epic espers out there. Right, now, Feng Nussy, easy C tier in my opinion. She sucks. She is so bad, she's so mid, she's so useless. I don't even know why they released her. Okay, so jokes aside, she is one of the best, if not probably like second or third best espers in this game right now because of her kit. So she has a lot of cooldown reduction right on her third skill, and she has a dispel at the same time, which means that she completely bypassed immunity relics. So if the enemy comes with immunity relics, that's completely done, right? So in PvP, she's insane. In RTA, she is godlike. She's the queen. And in terms of point war, oh my god, you just completely demolish the entire enemy's lineup in just one go, right? And not only that, she is very good in Temporal Tower because she's very useful against bosses as well. You can cooldown increase bosses using her kit, but that's not the same for Frigga, because for Frigga you need to stun the boss in order for the cooldown reduction or the cooldown increase to happen, right? But that's not the case for Nussy. So Nussy is just so broken for every single content, and I've covered her in several of my videos as well, and she's just so good. So freaking good. The only place where I feel like she lacks a little bit is Ritual Miracles, but then again, I wouldn't be complaining if I had a Nussy, and I wouldn't be saying like, oh my god, I can't use her in Ritual Miracles. Now, Gabrielle, very interesting kid. So she's really good for early game players as a pure support, and for end game players, she becomes really good as a DPS esper come stun bot because like she has a lot of multi-hits, which is able to land a lot of Zeus stuns. So she is so strong, so powerful from the start all the way to the end. She's useful in everything, right? She's useful in PvP, she's useful in, yeah, just all kinds of PvP, all kinds of PvE as well. You use her in many different places, right? You might even use her in Chronos just because of her buffs. Because I have tried using her before and it's still not bad. Like her 3 turns immunity and all that. I know the 3 turns probably comes from R6, right? Yeah, it comes from R6. But the thing is, she's still so viable in PvE regardless, because the way you're probably gonna build her is a little bit tanky. So she's gonna survive, she's gonna do her thing. She's definitely S tier. Now next up, we have one of the most mid espers as well. So we have Gauis, who at R2 becomes incredibly broken. So he has accuracy for all your allies in his normal state, which is what he starts off with, which means that your allies who are naturally going to be faster because they are controlling espers, they are going to instantly benefit from 20% extra accuracy. Mind-blowing. And then when he finally transforms, he would then give the rest of your allies extra crit rate, which is not so useful in most cases, but it does still make some of your Chronos teams a little bit easier to build because you do not need to have so much crit rate. So for example, if you are bringing espers like Ollie, if you are bringing espers like Xiao In, for example, these espers, they can be a lot slower than Gauis, which means that when Gauis transforms, those other espers are naturally going to benefit a lot from the extra crit rate. But of course, apart from that, he's just so good in like Desolate Lands, he's so good in Dark Star Lord, he's so good in a lot of PvE content, so good for rushing like Sonic Rift, Temporal Tower, Holo Battles, Point War, everything, right? He's like so good for everything. I mean, it really depends on what the enemy has, especially for PvP, but his damage output is so freaking strong. So because of that, right, naturally S tier, unmatched. Now this is probably where a lot of you guys are gonna like say, no, Daddy Free to Play don't make sense at all. And the reason for that is because I'm gonna put Hyde at B tier. And yes, I know a lot of you guys are gonna say, oh, Hyde is so strong, he's so overpowered, he's like definitely A tier or S tier, right? A lot of you guys are gonna put him at S tier. And the reason why I put it at B tier is because he is really good in PvP. Yes, he is really good in all kinds of PvP. But in terms of like PvE content, are you naturally gonna use him, right? So if you're, let's say, an early game player or mid game player, are you oh my god, my cat he's crying right now. Are you naturally going to use Hyde in place of some other esper when it's a lot easier for you to like just bring something else instead? Like maybe bring another healer, bring another actual DPS esper, for example. Because Hyde, he is not known to be dealing a lot of damage at the get-go. He needs to have a lot of stacks in order for him to be more tanky, more dangerous, right? So it's not something that you're going to benefit a lot in PvE content. And yes, I know he does work in some PvE content, like some of the Temporal Tower flaws where he becomes a cheat code. I do agree, especially against Jiang, that is true. But it's so few and far in between that I don't feel like he's an esper that I'll think of all the time that, oh, I need to bring him for this particular PvE content. That is not the case. Now, next up we have Ife, and I was so freaking excited about Ife when I heard about the changes to Chronos and Apep, and I thought that she's gonna excel in these two content, but the truth is, poisons don't work on these bosses. I'm not too sure about 3.1.9, I have yet to test it out, but from where she is right now, in terms of her viability, it's like completely nothing, right? Okay, she's only gonna be really good in Temporal Tower because of like poisons and stuns, which are good, but at the same time, I don't feel like poisons are necessarily that good in those PvE content because you do not want the enemies to take a turn. Instead, what you want to do is to AP control and to stun lock them or to freeze lock them. So poisons in itself is not necessarily really good. And in fact, I do feel like espers like Jiang, for example, she is much better in terms of like poison DPS, or because her DPS doesn't even come from the poisons, right? But it's just a really nice add-on on top of her Nether Bloom effect. So I do feel like Ife is in a very weird spot right now, and I think due to the lack of use, like just basically Dark Starlord, right? That's like basically where she's really good at. Apart from that, I don't really feel like she has a lot of value. Alright, so new Esper time, we have Intisar. So Code Exploit, your normal attack now triggers your third skill whenever she is not on stealth, which is like insane. This is so good. But like I talked about before, it's not necessary for her to have this in order for her kit to work, because I do use her in my Chronos runs and it's perfect, right? I have like sub-minute runs with her at R0 and it works perfectly fine. So she's really good in Dark Starlord, she's really good in Chronos, and that's mostly it. She is going to be useful in Shadow Fire, for example, right? Because of her AoE damage and just the defense break. Okay, wait, no, her defense break doesn't even matter. Her attack debuff also doesn't matter. So it's just her AoE damage, which she's not bad, right? She's kind of like on the Liling level in terms of DPS for Shadow Fire, but she's definitely not a Zora level in terms of Shadow Fire content. So she's quite limited right now, but I do feel like based on the places that she's good at, I do feel like that carries a lot of value. So for example, in Chronos, which is just always good to have. In some PvE content where she's a pretty decent debuffing damage dealer, and of course Dark Starlord where she's remarkable. She's just very strong there. So I feel like she's in between C tier and B tier, but I do feel like she belongs in B tier because she's definitely more useful than the Espers in C tier, that's for sure. Now, every once in a while, I like to break the mold and just bring an Esper that doesn't deserve to be in a certain tier to that tier, and Jiang is definitely one of those Espers. Now, the reason why I say that is I do not necessarily want to put in an S tier because of his lack of use in a lot of content. So like for example, in most PvE content, you will never use him in those areas, right? You will never ever touch him in those areas. But the thing is, he has come to the point where he is almost a necessity in RTA. So the moment you have him, your RTA experience is going to be so much better right now. And in terms of like PvP, he's not very good in point wall defense, but he's really good in point wall offense. It's almost like a sure win. And in terms of holo battle, he's like extremely godlike. He's like the best Esper for that in that case, right? So I kind of want to put him at A tier just based on the versatility and viability of his kit. But yet at the same time, I feel like breaking the mold to put him at S tier just because of how insane he is in those areas. But I know I'm breaking a rule over here, but you know what? This is my tier list. So I am going to put him at S tier right now, but just pay attention that I would put him at A tier if I was just considering his overall viability. But yeah, so S tier for now. Now, Jinyu Yao, especially at R2, she becomes very powerful because the AP gain that she has whenever one of the allies get debuffed is insane. It's like, I can't remember what the percentage is, I think it's about 30%. So the thing is, she's really good in many different PvE content, right? She's really good in APEP. That's like one place where you can actually land poisons against the boss by returning the poisons. So that's where she's really good at. She's also incredibly good at Dark Starlord for obvious reasons. And she's also really good in like Shadow Gale, for example, where you can strip off the debuffs that your team has just to increase the multiplier of your scores. And of course, on top of that, she's just so good in PvP right now. Like, even though Trickies exist, she is also a pretty good counter against Trickies in some sense, because you can return all the debuffs to the Tricky and you can like stun lock him and all that, and you can take out the Tricky very easily as well. So she's a pretty good counter. She just needs to use one skill, chop off 30% of her HP because of the Tricky's passive effect. But apart from that, with the full cleanse on your team, she's going to make things a lot easier for your entire lineup. So it's not quite the same as like Tricky countering other cleansers in this case. So in terms of viability, she's definitely way up there right now. Just be careful, if you ever reach R4, this sucks a lot. So whenever she starts chipping away at her own HP, this sucks a lot for Dark Starlord because she's going to slowly whittle herself down and she might not survive for 7 entire boss attacks. So that's just something extra. But anyway, because of that, I think I'm going to chuck her A tier. I feel like she has a lot of use right now. Now, next up, we have Lewis, and I am so excited for his new kit. So take a look at his R2, right? You dispel all buffs from the target with your second skill. This is so good, and the reason for that is because not only are you dispelling all buffs, you're also landing a seer debuff on your second skill, which would then, when you crit, right, let's say you crit, you will then go straight into your third skill and potentially one-shot almost all kinds of Espers in the game right now. So I really like the fact that his kit is just so overwhelmingly powerful, and his first skill also increases his AP, which is really good if, let's say, you're on cooldown And if you're running other espers like Abigail or Fabrice, for example, you can push his AP up again so that when he normal attacks, he becomes a little bit closer to his next turn as well. So it's very easy to cycle his turns in his kit, and I like it a lot. He does a lot of single target damage, and he's really good in quite a few content as well. So he's pretty decent in APEP, and he's also really good in PvP. And I do use him specifically for like Hyde flaws in like Temporal Tower, Infinity Tower. So because of that, I am going to put him at B tier just because of the range of usefulness that he has, but he's really good at what he does. Now let's talk about Liling. So he has Seer on his first skill, he has a defense break on his second skill if you're at R2, and he has good AoE damage, he has single target damage as well. He's pretty all-rounded as well in terms of DPS, and he has a lot of AP movement, right? His third skill absorbs AP, his second skill also absorbs a lot of AP, which is pretty good. He absorbs up to 50% on his second skill, so he's very versatile as a newbie Esper. He's very useful in Shadowfire, he's very useful in maybe some of the Temporal Tower flaws, and he's also very useful in PvP, especially in Point War, for example. So in terms of what he's useful for, I do feel like he covers quite a few grounds, which is not bad, and especially since he's one of the beginner Espers as well, he is one of the better choices, I would think. He's one of the better starting Espers that is very easy to just get into at the start. Now, if you thought that Lucas was a really good stun bot, wait till you get to R2 where he becomes a much better, sorry, not stun bot by AP bot, now he becomes a stun bot at R2, because if you spam your first skill, there is a really good chance that you're going to stun a lot of different Espers. So you can selectively choose who you want to attack, and by doing so, you can, definitely reduce your AP down to 0 and therefore inflict the stun afterwards, which is very useful for his kit indeed. So in terms of viability, he's definitely very good in a lot of PvE content, like just straight up really good. Oh well, mostly just in the tower content, right? But like for example, Calamity Tower, very powerful, very solid there. Infinity Tower, very useful, he has AP control and stuns, perfect. And in terms of PvP, he is not subpar as well. He's also pretty good, especially in Point War. So I think I'm gonna put him at A tier for what he can bring to the table. He is definitely very useful. Now, Garmr. Okay, so at R2, he has an interesting kit, a little bit of change to his passive where instead of 8 stacks, now it goes up to 12 stacks, but at the same time, whenever he casts Emblazoned Strike, he gains 2 more Burning Sun stacks, so it kind of balances off in the end. But all this does is just increase his ceiling, right, his damage output, but it doesn't change the fact that the reason why people don't use him all that much is because of how reliant he is on the rest of your team. So if let's say you get stunned, for example, that's it, right? Your entire team loses just because the enemy lands a stun on your team, because you're not going to be able to land your nuke properly now and you're not able to one-shot. So running Espers like Garmr in PvP, which is probably where you're only going to run him in, not only do you require to have a shit ton of speed, you also need to have a shit ton of attack, because if you do not one-shot, that's about it. You're kind of screwed, right? And because of how reliant he is on so many other Espers, it's honestly not a very good thing for him. So because of that, I am actually going to put him at C tier at R2, right? So if he's at R6, he might be a little bit better because he's apparently able to insta-cast without actually eating into his cooldowns, which means that if he gains a turn, he's going to be able to Emblazoned Strike again. Very nice. Now, Ollie at R2, he is so good, right? Invincibility for 2 turns, amazing stuff. So Ollie is really good in many different content. He's really good in Chronos, like that is a necessity for you to have like speed clears. And not just speed clears, but extremely safe speed clears as well. And he's also really good in Temporal Tower because of the HP scaling damage that he has. And believe it or not, the way I run my Ollie is with like no attack whatsoever, very low attack, and just a lot of HP and a lot of crit damage, and he's still able to do like 200,000 damage to Chronos. So he's very viable in Temporal Tower, like just bossing content in general, and I do know that there are people who do use him in Dark Starlord, even though I wouldn't really recommend it, but he's also viable in that sense because he protects your allies and he also lends defense down. And obviously he's really good in PvP as well, so with all of that added up together, he's a very well-rounded Esper and he has a lot of use, so because of that, I think he's definitely going to make the ranks of S tier right now. He's so good right now. Alright, so now Ophelia, she is so strong for PvP, all kinds of PvP. Okay, maybe not Point War per se, but in Holo Battle and RTH, that's where she shines the most. And in terms of PvE content, she is quite good in Fafnir. I would say that she's decent because she has some multi-hits and, well, just a little bit of multi-hit. But apart from that, she does carry a lot of DPS as well, which is very useful, right? So in terms of like clearing content, yeah, she's also good in Cube Miracles, but it's like kind of like who cares, right? So I wouldn't say that she is that well spread out in terms of her viability. So maybe in terms of like Temporal Tower content, she is good there, but it's not like you would use her over some other Espers, like maybe like a Jiang, for example. You would prioritize certain other Espers instead of her. Like if you had a Gauis, for example, if you had an Ashley, I think these Espers strive a little bit better than what she can bring to the table, which is just straight up DPS. So yeah, I do feel like I would put her at A tier. I know this is a little bit different from, I think, my previous tier list where I think I mentioned that she probably deserves S tier. I kind of take it back. I still feel like she is sitting pretty in A tier right now. So, Raven. Okay, so this is strictly my opinion about her, and I know a lot of you guys have different experiences because you actually use her and not me. But I think that in terms of PvP, in terms of point war, she is still the GOAT, right? She's still the GOAT of point war. She's able to land the defense down, which allows you to still cleave even though we currently have the HP boost of 35%. She makes that happen as well, because not only are you stripping, which is very important, but the defense break is key as well. And because she's a streamer type, she is very likely to land those defense downs as well. But in terms of just generic PvE content, I cannot for the life of me see myself using her in any PvE content, not even in like event maps at all. So like even if you're talking about event maps, I'll prefer other aspects that land AoE defense breaks, like for example Zora. I feel like Zora brings a lot more to the table than just a defense break. She has a lot of AoE damage as well, she has a lot of debuffs which are quite handy. But you know, this is just my opinion, right? So because of that, I think I'm gonna actually put her at C tier in the niche tier. Yes, I'm so sorry, okay? Yes, you can go ahead and start flaming me for that. Now, Sally, so she obviously becomes very powerful at R6, and in fact, I think in R6 she's like straight up S tier, but because she is not at R6 right now, and we're only talking about R2, which is just a healing effect on her second skill, which is okay. So I do feel like she carries enough on her kit to be good in many different content, like in PvP, and in PvE, she is definitely useful in many different areas because all she needs to do is to just exist and she's gonna do whatever she needs to do. So she's also very viable in Dark Starlord, believe it or not. I have seen some players run her not even at R6, right? At less than R6 in Team 1 because of the damage mitigation that she brings and the healing and the cleansing as well. So she has a lot for Dark Starlord and she has a lot for PvE content. So even all the Ritual Miracles, because it doesn't matter if she takes more damage, she's so freaking tanky, and at the same time she does bring the extra layer of tankiness to your team. So because of that, she has a lot built into one kit, which is very nice, except that the main thing that sticks out to me is her long cooldown on her third skill, which if you do not speed tune your team properly, you may not have that in effect when you need it the most. But apart from that, she's just really good in PvE, very good in PvP, everything, right? So I am going to put her at S tier regardless of R6 or not. But it's just that at R6, she becomes like SSS tier, something like that. Now we have Sienna, and she is definitely overpowered at R6. Let's take a look at what R6 does, right? So Wrath of the World stun extended to 2 turns. So her AoE stun, which procs at 100% of the time, is actually extended 2 turns. It's like so broken. And her R2 is no slouch either, right? It increases your attack up and speed up durations to 3 turns. Amazing stuff. But because of this change, believe it or not, she actually loses value in Shadow Gale. She does gain more value in Shadow Stream, that's for sure, because the longer your speed up durations last, the better. But in terms of Shadow Gale, you want your buffs to expire faster, so this is actually bad for her Shadow Gale, but you know what? Just use something else, right? Use a Meredith, for example. So she's really good in all the Temporal Tower content, like extremely good. She's a cheat code, right? And she may not be that useful in Ritual Miracles, but she's also very viable in PvP. So if you have seen her in PvP, you do know what she's capable of, and you will be quite afraid of what she brings to the table right now. And especially if you're meeting an R6 Sienna, that's where you start to really shit yourself. Now the thing is, she wasn't that big of a deal back in prior to 3.1.7, and the reason for that is because Dahlia exists, and you know, pushing your AP, getting the first turn advantage was big back then. But right now, where most players run tanky, she starts to see a little bit more value, because one way to counter tanky comps is to just AP control or to land stuns, which is something that she has in her kit. She has a lot of AP movement and she has stuns as well. So right now in the current landscape, she is very good in both PvP and PvE, so she is definitely one of the best aspects in this game right now. Now, Tang Xuan, at R2, he gains a very interesting Pursuit attack kit, which I think changes his kit a lot. Like, it gives him a lot of value. So previously, I might put him at like niche tier or even below niche, but right now with the fact that he has a 20% chance to Pursuit on top of another Pursuit, so he can actually Pursuit an unlimited number of times as long as you're lucky, it is going to add on a lot to his DPS output, and it is going to make him more viable, definitely more viable. But the problem still exists, which is the problem that I had with him in the past is he is so RNG centric, and what I'm talking about is the proc chance of his defense breaks is, I believe it's 40%, which is not good. You need 80 to 100%, and in fact for defense breaks I think 100% is quite necessary. So because his proc chance is so low, and now you're adding more RNG on top of everything else, like just 20% chance to launch Pursuit attack, so if you do not launch a Pursuit attack, then this R2 is like completely wasted, right? So 4 of your 5 attacks would be completely wasted, which is quite sad. So even though this is really good and really fun, I would think that this is more towards like fun rather than it being good and it being a consistent way for you to land DPS. So some people have been saying like use him for APEP. The problem with that is, like I said, inconsistent debuffs. So Disease might be more consistent, but you already have a Joser for that, and Joser is one of those aspects that you definitely want to build because Joser is super consistent for that, and especially the defense down at the same time. So I wouldn't recommend Tang Xuan over, like, let's say Drew, for example. So probably not Tang Xuan in APEP, especially since his typing is not good as well. So because of that, I am actually still going to put him at niche tier. I don't think I want to change my mind about him. I have tested him out, okay? I have tested him out at R4, and it's not anything remarkable unless you suddenly proc multiple pursuits, and then it's like, wow! And then your next 10 runs is like shit. Now we are going to talk about Thor, and I did mention in the past where I didn't like his second skill because he needs to re-attack in order for the debuff to explode, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that is true at all. I feel like if his first skill actually takes out the enemy, the debuff is still going to explode because that's what I noticed in the Reincarnation Tower. I'm not sure whether is that a bug or is that just intended, because the Thor in Reincarnation Tower is always going to be at least R2, right? So it's definitely going to play its role, its function. So I feel like his kit is still good. As long as, you know, as long as you take out the enemy and the debuff still explodes, that's fine. That's perfect. So his rotation is really good. So you can use his third skill, go into his first skill, and then go back into his third skill again. So he has like this unlimited cycle, which is very nice. So in terms of DPS, he has a really strong output. And yes, in PvP, I do understand that a lot of enemies carry immunity. A lot of enemies have cleanse as well. The cleansing part is not really so much of a problem, but I think immunity is just a bigger part, right? So just bring strips, right? So if they have immunity at the start, save your tricky to use the strip, and then just nuke the entire team afterwards. So he does carry a lot of damage in his kit right now. But of course, the game is not just about PvP. There is also a lot of PvE content where I think he strives a lot. So in terms of content where you can land debuffs, so just not the Desolate Lands basically, he is still going to be quite useful, and yeah, not the Ritual Miracles as well because of his typing. But if you're talking about bossing, yes, he carries a lot on his kit, and in fact, I really like his kit right now for the fact that you can proc Miko Curse multiple times on the boss enemy because you don't need to kill the boss, which means previously he was only viable when you kill the enemy, now he is viable when you attack the enemy. So very good for Temporal Tower, very good for Infinity Tower, good DPS all around, amazing AoE nuking skill. So because of that, I am going to put him at A tier as with before. Now, Tia is like the better version of Fatum sisters in my opinion, even though they are different. So she don't have healing, she don't have speed up buff. But apart from that, I feel like Tia really serves her purpose really well. She has a speed lead, and on top of that, she has a lot of AP control. So it's like perfect synergy. But of course, most importantly is that her speed lead allows her to be functioning in Point War in PvP content, which is what makes her so good. So a lot of people are very confused about what Nightbringer is. This is not her third skill, this is her first skill. So her first skill does inflict silence, which is not amazing because it's just her first skill after all, and you're not going to use your first skill all that much. You're going to go from your third skill to your second skill, then into your first skill. So this is not going to bring too much into her kit. But she's just really good in PvP and quite decent in some Infinity Tower flaws where you cannot stun, so you want to AP control. That's where she comes in very handy. But of course, like I said, right, PvP, she's just a goddess over there. So because of that, I'll put her at B tier. So I started this video talking about Tricky, but take a look at his R2. Your third skill, not only does it strip, not only does it land misread up, but it also inflicts speed down on the target for 2 turns. This is so good for everything. So good for PvE, so good for PvP, so good for like freaking everything, and even good for Darkstar Lord as well. If you so needed a buff stripper with misread up and speed down, he brings a lot to the table as well, and very viable. It's just that the rest of his kit is maybe not so useful for Darkstar Lord, but now maybe his first skill is actually still good. But you know what? He's definitely S tier. He's like double S tier in my opinion. Alright, so this is obviously going to be triple, double, triple, freaking quadruple S tier. So Unas, I always put him at S tier first before I talk about his kit. So the thing is, he has a lot of AP control, he has a lot of AP movement, I mean, so he pushes your team's AP by the biggest amount, 30%. And on top of that, that skill, his third skill has a cooldown of 3 turns, he has the fastest speed in the game, he has defense break on his first skill, he has a team-wide immunity on his passive, and right now, even at R2, he has an attack up for all allies for 2 turns. So he covers so much ground on his own, and he's great in every single content in the game. Everything. Like literally every single content. So I'm very happy that we are talking about an R2 tier list, because when we talk about Yunchuan, if you're not talking about R2, he's just gonna go like straight into the dustbin, right? But because he's at R2, not only is he viable in Darkstar Lord, like extremely game-breakingly viable, not only is he a god in Fafnir as well, like a tremendous powerhouse in Fafnir, not only is he so strong in PvP as well, he carries so much in his kit, like a lot of offense, a lot of debuffs, a lot of like misread up as well, and like all those really good debuffs, right? Like speed down. He even has a speed up for your entire team. There is so much on his kit. So because of that, right, we are talking about R2 Yunchuan here. I kind of want to put him at S tier because he's so good for everything. Like he's just really so good for everything. But I would say that he's probably one of the lower end of the S tier in terms of like comparing Yunchuan with the rest of the S tier experts, for example. Alright, and believe it or not, I've actually been recording this video for 56 minutes right now. Oh my god, I have a lot of editing to do. But we can finally end off with Zora, and her R2 effect is amazing. So her third skill now lands a defense down as well, which is so freaking good, especially for like Shadow Fire. So she is going to instantly replace your Lin Xiao, because Lin Xiao has an 80% chance of landing a defense down, which sucks. This Galactic Rush has a 100% chance of landing defense down, which is very viable in a lot of content. A lot of Temporal Tower content, right? The AoE defense down, very useful, and on top of that, she cycles with a lot of extra attacks, a lot of DPS, really good for speed clearing like Sonic Rift and all that. So she's kind of like on the same level as Jiang in terms of like viability, I would think. Like they do different things, but in terms of like how I feel about these espers, I feel like she at R2 is on the same level as Jiang in a lot of these different cases. And in terms of PvP, she's no slouch either as well. She has the defense down, which is great, but obviously you need to use her in the right locations. But in terms of single target damage, she also carries a lot in her kit because her second skill also increases her own crit damage by I think 30%, which allows her to deal more damage, which also cycles back into her first skill, and it does a lot of stuff, right? So I really like her kit right now. I wouldn't put her at S tier, I would put her at A tier, but one of the higher A tiers right now. So that's it for this list. Let me know your comments, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. And like I said, right, everything here is strictly my own opinion, and everything that I am crafting here is based on general viability and how strong they are in those areas. So there are some espers that you might be like, wait, why is this esper in C tier? And the reason is because you skipped the video and you didn't understand my explanation of why that esper is not viable in certain content, for example. But anyway, feel free to disagree with whatever that I said, because there are no two people in this world who think alike. So if you have anything that you want to suggest, anything that you want to change as well, let me know so that I can update this list. I might make a pinned comment down in the comment section below just to list out some of the changes or some of the regrets that I have. I tend to have like a couple of regrets after uploading the video anyway. But anyway, with that said, hope you guys enjoyed today's content. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, it really helps the channel, and subscribe for more Dislyte content. Now with that said, this has been Free to Play, and as always, I will see you in the next video.